Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Lonnie Somers, and I see we have a lot of our attendees starting to pop in. So welcome to our HALPosium. Usually we are doing this in person and having a bit of fun and some things during it, but obviously under the current circumstances of COVID, we're doing this virtually and breaking it up into a couple of days as opposed to typically one full day, so that people don't get Zoom fatigued, as we all probably have experienced quite a bit lately in the last several months. This year, probably more than ever, usually the HALPosium that we're doing is talking about some of the new things that we're doing at HAL Sports, talking about ways to enhance sponsorship, talking about ways to enhance your events, really things to help grow your events. And this year is obviously a lot different because it's now, this symposium is really gonna be focusing, I think, on what everybody's mind is: how do we have events? What type of things do we do? Do we have to do virtual? Do we have to do hybrid? Can we do in person? What is it gonna look like? What's gonna be required of us? And so forth. So we're gonna be going in some pretty heavy detail. Myself, along with a lot of our panelists, have been working heavily over the last few months, or several months now, on how we pivot with events. And we know so many of you on here today are community events and charities that are looking at how you bring in your funds, which are so vitally important to the success of your organizations and the missions that you guys are accomplishing. So as always, HAL Sports is here to help and assist you and consult with any of those things. We've been working tirelessly. I've told Michelle Somers, co-owner, and my beautiful wife, that it's incredible for having such little events this year, of how busy we have actually been. And a lot of it has been working with a lot of you. Which we want to do is to help you, as this year has been very challenging with, unfortunately, having to see cancellations and pivoting to virtual and how that looks, as well as just consulting with. With that, I do want to go ahead and kind of get started with kind of our first topic, and that's really me to kind of talk about what does the current state look like and where are we looking like things are going to go for 2021. And this has been an area that I've been doing a lot of talking about. Several of you might know that I'm on the board of Running USA. We've done some symposiums recently talking about this topic and what does it mean for you. We're very fortunate today. I guess one nice, if there's any plus, is that in this virtual HALPosium today is that I know that we have a lot of people joining us from a lot of different states with some of the different organizations we work with. So we all certainly know every county, every city, every state is different in how they're handling the pandemic. It doesn't mean that they're all 180 degrees different, but they are certainly different. And it certainly comes different to when we get to the events and how they're being handled. And I would tell you that as frustrating as it can be at times, the most important thing is now and going forward into 2021 is patience. Patience is a really key thing that we all need to have. We definitely, there's no disputing the fact that we can see that, well, I can't have gyms open, but I can have a restaurant with people in it that don't have masks. Gyms, we can have masks, these different things. Some of the stuff doesn't seem that it seems fair. Some of it doesn't seem that it makes a lot of sense on what some industries are required to do and what others. I mean, we know, for example, that so far, and all the statistics and stuff like that, being outdoors is really good. Obviously, you don't want to be in these huge groups breathing and coughing on everybody, but being outdoors, getting some exercise is really good. These are all things our events do. Obviously, I know we have some of our American Lung Association members on here who do indoor stair climbs, which that obviously is a challenge for this particular area. But we know outdoor events, for the most part, are very safe if done right. But arguably, we've been restricted pretty heavily right away. I remember when we first started this, we had just actually finished 2 stair climbs a few days before pretty much the whole country had shut down. One of our major outdoor events had to shut down. And at the time, I remember talking with clients going, hey, it's gonna be fine. We got a couple months, so you can reschedule. Once we get to summer, everything will be fine. If we get to summer and we can't have events, we got bigger issues. Well, yep, definitely stuck my foot in my mouth on that one, because here we are in December and events still aren't returning back to normal. And it's been definitely a lesson of patience. as we've all worked our way through this pandemic. And Scott said it best with the fact that, we now know what we know going forward into 2021. We know we're in a pandemic. We know things are going to look different. And how's that going to affect us? So one of the things for sure, again, as I talk about patience, is understand that the permitting agencies, the departments of health, they're dealing with a lot. And I ask that you try to have some patience with them. There are so many areas that they have to try to figure out, not only with hospitals and vaccines that hopefully are now coming. They've got to figure out, how do restaurants open up? How do hair salons open up? How do spas, gyms, your local stores, everything? What type of requirements need to be around that? And for us in Colorado, it's county by county. Each county is responsible. The state kind of tells them what level they're in, and then they're responsible for adhering to those things. Sometimes they can ask for waivers. So it's a very complicated area. We've been very fortunate. Cree Kelly and Andrea Dowdy, who's the CEO of the Colfax Marathon, were led with the state as well as the city of Denver in saying, when we met as an event coalition, if you will, and said, okay, we've got all these events that happen outdoors. How do we bring them back? What type of things need to be there? Well, we were looking at, it was all grouped in. We had farmers markets and outdoor concerts and restaurants and triathlon and cycling and all these things. And really they're so different enough that we can't just make one general guideline. So we were fortunate that the city of Denver and the state allowed us to create basically a task force specifically designed just for run walks, so that we could figure out guidelines that made sense for them. And each group was able to look at that, and they brought in experts in those industries to look at the guidelines, to then to formulate or what the mandates were, to formulate guidelines around that, get them vetted through the city and counties, get them vetted through the state so that we could get approval at the Department of Health levels in the various either cities or counties or the states. And that has been a monumental task to do, but it's been important, and it's really, again, that's where the patience comes in to be, is that, let's face it, our government entities and the permitting agencies, they're not experts in this. And so where we can offer assistance and support and guidance without, honestly just being a pain to them, is key. And that's something that we have been working on at HAL Sports, and all of us have worked on very heavily, is to establish those relationships and let them know that we're here to have safe events. We don't want to put on an event if it's not going to be safe. We're not doing it just because we can get away with it, or that we're all struggling. Our business is obviously struggling. Our charities are struggling to bring in the funds that we typically do. We get that. But we definitely, safety is our number one priority. And that is where we need to be looking at as we look forward. So what is 2021 going to look like? It's really anybody's guess, but the mitigation plans that have been in place that HAL Sports has been using, I would say that you need to plan that much of 2021 is going to look very similar to what we currently look like in 2020. And I don't know when that will change, but I would expect that we're not going to see things really open up from an event standpoint, probably until the fall. We hope, fingers crossed. You have to remember that it's great that we have all this wonderful news about the vaccines, and that's very positive news. We need to get in the United States somewhere in the neighborhood of 220, depending upon which healthcare national healthcare expert you listen to, between 220 to 260 million people vaccinated and or have COVID, in order for us to be in a herd immunity standpoint where it's not going to cause a major effect. So that's a lot of people. And we know that the vaccines right now are 2 shots, 30 days apart. It's going to take several months to get this rolled out. And the other thing too is that I have I can speak for some of, or say this because I have some relatives that have had COVID and fortunately didn't have it affect them too terribly, but we get a little bit comfortable when we've had COVID. Some of the younger, well, not even younger, but even some of the people my age and a little bit older, they get comfortable that they've had COVID. So they feel like they are free to they don't have to wear masks, they don't have to do all this stuff. But just because they potentially can't get COVID again, which I know that there has been some cases where people have re-caught it, they can still have the virus on them. So I was recently at a family function where we were trying to keep away, apart from everybody. One of my nieces has experienced COVID. She literally went around and gave everybody a hug. And you know, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You're not repellent to COVID. you might have had it, can't get infected, but if you hug somebody that's got it, that virus is on you, then you went and hug somebody that doesn't have it, well, guess what? So what that means is that masks and social distancing, as much as they've been a part of 2020, they're going to be a part of 2021. I would fully expect, and I expect that I would tell all of you with your events as you look at planning these, plan that you're going to need to have a really good COVID mitigation plan, and Cree is going to speak to what are the key components of that and what they need to look like. But you're going to need to have that. And that's something that as HAL Sports, we will certainly help you in developing and guide you through, or completely take responsibility for your events, because there's a lot to it and a lot to think about on those things. When you think about bathrooms, lining up people, how you line them up, how you work them through a course, how they exit, what type of goodies are they getting? Are they getting, what about water stations? All those things, everything has a degree of mitigation that has to be done around COVID. We have done probably close to 16 to 18 events since the end of July, and we've done them, knock on wood, so far without any incidents. We just had a 500-person event on Sunday. It was funny, with a 5K of 500 people, usually it's only a few hours long. It was pretty much felt like a marathon, where you're there at 4 a.m. and you don't leave until 2 p.m. But everything went very, very smooth. And Colorado right now, like much of the country, has a very high incidence of infection rate. They estimate that 1 out of every 40 people right now in the state is currently infected with COVID. So that means out of those 500 people, you know, we probably had 40 to 50 people that were asymptomatic, despite, you know, we have warnings if you've been in contact with anybody, whatnot. We know not everybody is going to know that they have been exposed. So we haven't had any incidents, which is really good news, and so forth. And I can tell you also a little bit the mentality of your participants. As you work to develop these mitigation programs, and again, I would tell you that regardless of what your state or county is requiring, err on the side of caution. Be a bit more cautious and even a bit more restrictive and a bit more mitigating than what your, you know, if it seems, for example, you know, if you are, let's just use South Dakota. South Dakota has been pretty much not doing a lot of mitigation as much. There have been some events there. There's been some really big events that have taken place, and they've had super spreader events that have taken place because of it with COVID. But if I were doing an event in South Dakota, while it might not be popular with people there, I would be doing the mitigation plans that we use in Denver, because I don't want that to come back and bite me. I don't want, as an event producer or the charities that we work with, to have any part in something being a super spreader event and making us look bad and damaging us for the future. You want to ensure that you're taking all the precautions that you can to keep people safe. And there's also comfort in making them feel safe. The participants that we had in this past event, many of them had not done events since February or March. And I would tell you that out of all the people that we had sign up, we probably had attrition rate just around 15 to 20% that didn't show up. And a lot of them didn't show up because they were nervous. You know, sure, there was some of the usual thing, I was out too late or didn't really feel like it or wasn't properly trained to do a 5K, but a lot of them feel nervous. And we had a lot of really good messages that came back from those that attended saying, you know, paraphrasing a lot of them, but the general consensus was, we were nervous, we were glad to see an event, but we were nervous how it was going to be and if we felt safe. And it was really nice to see that a lot of them were so complimentary on the amount of mitigation that we did. They felt incredibly safe. They never felt that they were near anybody that would potentially cause any issues. They didn't feel like they were grouped together. And most importantly, despite the event being different, they still had fun. They still enjoyed themselves. And that was where not only all the mitigation part was heavy work on our end, but then we really embraced technology since we can't have a general event. And some things that we did, just as an example of that we did, is we have essentially a hybrid event. We allowed people to do it virtually. if they wanted to. We even allowed people up to who signed up for in-person to switch to virtual all the way leading up to the start of the event. And then we also, those that were there, we figured that we have to create an experience for them. The event that we had was called Rudolph Ramble, and we do this cute little story about Rudolph gets lost during December, and Santa shows up and he needs everyone's help to find him at the park because he's rambling around, and obviously he's very important to Christmas. People have a lot of fun with the theme. They dress up, come in big teams. Santa's usually there, you know, taking pictures with everybody, the whole thing. Well, we couldn't do a lot of those things this year. But surprisingly, we got very close to hitting our cap number that we had for the event. We were only about 20 shy from that cap of 600 people. And but things that we did with the virtual component and the in-person event is, since we couldn't have Santa there, we did an opening ceremony where we had Santa Claus address everybody. And we put that out a couple of days before the event. At the event, I had a recording of Santa, you know, saying hello to everybody and playing a message, thanking them for being there and having some fun with that. We did free photos for everybody. On course, we used some technology that allows messages to play through people's smartphones and their earpods that they're wearing, or earbuds that they're wearing while they're going through the course, and it was different messages. We had one from Santa, we had some elves, if you will, do some fun puns along the way. We even had Kermit the Frog that appeared on it and did some fun things. So we tried to create that experience, and that experience was also done to those that were virtual. Like Cree has said, he has kind of an issue with the idea of the word pivot. I don't like virtual, because you're not virtually doing it. You're still doing the event. You're doing it from your home. So I like to say at home edition for that, and we have fun with that. For Rudolph Ramble, it was, you know, the edition was the home for the holidays, Rudolph Ramble edition. So we try to make it fun. We try to have ways to people to collaborate and so forth. So I will tell you that, again, kind of summarizing my piece of this is, for 2021, if your event is taking place in the first 6 to 7 to probably even 8 months, and when you open up registration, some of the key things that you need to think about, one is, I would highly recommend that you have a hybrid event. That means that you're going to have that virtual component and you're going to have that at home component. And there's two reasons for that. One is, we never know if for somehow, why we have faith, you know, I think we're all very excited about these vaccines, but we don't know what we don't know. If there's a problem in distribution, if there's a problem with a vaccine, if there's a problem in getting them made, everything slows down. And this ends up being a longer situation, and we could see additional surges take place. We could see additional restrictions come into place. There's no guarantee that your event, you can't guarantee any of your participants at your event is going to be 100% in person, or that it wouldn't have to drastically change to limit its capacity, or that it may also have to switch 100% to virtual. So those, and we know that having to cancel an event is economically very difficult on the charities and the community events and those that produce events, especially because you outlay funds ahead of time. You have to buy the shirts. You can't just order them the day before. You have to order those medals. You have to order everything else. And those are upfront costs. And a lot of the registration money that comes in goes to that, and it supports your causes. So when you are doing registration, and this is something we're very big on, is make sure that people understand when they register that you know, they have the option of in-person, do a hybrid event as well. I highly recommend that, so that you can pivot to that or change to that very quickly if need be. But also, it gives your participants who maybe aren't going to be comfortable but still want to support you and still do the event a way to do that. That's so important. Don't neglect that piece of it, because you will have people, regardless of how vaccinations go and stuff, they're still going to feel uncomfortable. You think about, for last 6-7 months now, we have been told to social distance. You know, I know when I go in a store and somebody who isn't part of my family group walks by me, I'm kind of moving off to the side, kind of like, you know, how dare you get that close to me? It's a weird feeling. It's a weird feeling to be standing very close to people. So that reaction is going to be there for a while. It's going to take a while for people to feel comfortable and want to come back. And our goal is, as we do events, is make sure that we showcase that they can be done safely, that they are fun, and that all the safety precautions are being done. But that's number one. The second thing that's most important about making sure that you have that virtual component is, again, to protect yourself. If you have, and that people, that they know it up front when they register. You know, if you feel uncomfortable that we may have to go 100% virtual, don't register for the event. Make that clear up front so that your policies are clear. And that was another thing I would tell you to make sure that you do. Make sure your policies are clear so that people going into it know. If the event has to change for any reason, you know, you could have it open to 1,000 people, but all of a sudden the state comes in or your Department of Health comes in and says, you know what, we've got a surge. We're going to limit you to 200 people. Well, now you got a mess on your hands. How do you select what 200 people are going to get to come in person? You had 500 people register. What happens to the other 300 people? You need to make sure that people are clear up front when they register to know that they're going to need to be flexible. So that's another key thing in why that when you open up your registration, you want to do that. Of what your policy, or maybe your policy is going to be is like, hey, if we can't have person, we're gonna refund everybody. Make sure that you spell that out so people know ahead of time how that's going to be handled if something happens. Those are things, honestly, we never really thought about. I mean, sure, we had the no refund policy a lot of times because somebody, you know, a day before got sick or they, you know, hurt themselves and they want a refund, and it's kind of like, well, it's kind of like going to a concert, you know, it's, you bought the ticket. you don't get a refund if you don't show up. So this has obviously changed all that. So make sure that you have a policy about how to handle this. Make sure that what CRE goes over in this mitigation plan, that you have that. And the other important thing, while I have a few minutes left too, is when you're analyzing your event, you really need to analyze, is it feasible for you to have the event? Just because you can't have it doesn't necessarily mean you should. And what I mean by that is you know what your costs are, you know what you need to make off the event, you know what type of money comes in to support the charity, and you have to realize that the mitigation stuff that we're doing does take some extra costs. Now there is some areas that are cost savings because of mitigation plans, but when you do these mitigation plans, there's a lot of extra work. And I can tell you that for our team, you know, why we're trying to be sensitive to the fact that we have our clients and we want to support them and help them out as much as possible. And we certainly also want to ensure that we can keep our business going. We have extra costs too. You're not going to have as many volunteers at your event, if any at all, because one, there's a liability with that. And one is that, you know, the other second thing is that you really need to make sure that you have really good key people that know what they're doing, supporting your event. So a lot of our events have a lot more staff than they typically would. And Cree will talk about some of those very important roles that need to be there, because we don't want to rely on volunteers. Volunteers are great, and we do have some super volunteers and that get it and do a great job with it, and they're fantastic to have there. But overall, with an event, a typical 5K, we might have 30 to 40 volunteers. The one that we did on Sunday, we had 2 volunteers, and they were people. One was a race director for rock and roll who volunteered her time. So they were very heavily experienced people, and we still were able to do the event. But it means a lot more labor costs. It means a lot more setup and mitigation stuff that comes into play that you will see as Cree talks about. So when you look at that, you really need to look at the economics and say, is it feasible for us this year to have that event in person? Do we believe that if we normally get 1,000 people at our event, if we know, if we're a charity, maybe a cancer charity as an example, and we have a lot of people that are high risk, they probably ought not to come for safety reasons. So does that mean we could potentially only get 50% of the number that we get? So if that brings it that we're looking at 500 people, then out of that, how many people are going to feel comfortable or might change their mind? That might reduce that number down. And then we have the extra costs and so forth. So when you add that all together, does that mean that it's feasible to have? That is also why I think it's important to have that hybrid event, because a lot of those that are supporting your charities will still want to support your charities and help out the best that they can. Yes, certainly we have been affected by the pandemic financially, individually financially, a lot of us. So our funds maybe can't donate as many charities as we typically do, but I can tell you, and I think Dave and Scott will attest to this when they talk about it, is people still want to support the charities that they have that are important to them, and they want to help out any way that they can. So while you may not be making top as much as you typically do from donations, in fundraising, it has become very important. And we have actually seen some events take place where they've had to pivot to full virtual or maybe a hybrid event. And they've had to, maybe they brought in, 50% of the top revenue that they typically do. But because of the fundraising component and because that they pivoted to virtual and haven't had some of the costs that they normally would have, their net has been not that far off from what they typically would do with an in-person event. That's not how and that's, that isn't the case for everybody. So, you have to take that with a grain of salt and realize it's your own circumstance of how that would play out and what the comfortability of your base is and how active your base is and how large your base is to actually do those donations. But there are some organizations that have done pretty well, or they've done well enough that it's helped them continue their mission and so forth. So again, I know that's a lot of information and I know it was kind of all over the place with this, but I think the bottom line is plan again for 2021 that you're going to need to be looking at, is it feasible for you to have an event? Should you go virtual? Should you go hybrid? I definitely would not recommend a full 100% in-person event without having a hybrid component, just because there's a lot of unknowns. And for us, and when we're planning events, you guys know that you guys spend months at a time planning these. You have to almost start now for what it looks like. It's better to err on the side of caution and plan more restrictive or plan for more hybrid things. And if things get to when your event, if it's in the fall, if things loosen up a bit more, that's great. You've already done all the legwork behind you, as opposed to the opposite of having everything open and having things reverse on you and then having to figure out very quickly how to change things. So we're just a couple minutes before we're going to welcome Cree, but I want to open this up to if anyone has any quick questions. You can type those in the chat box there. It's always kind of interesting when you're doing this, because I'm waiting to see if anyone texts and things. In the meantime, it's quiet. Oh, okay, here's a good one. Can you explain hybrid versus full virtual? So a hybrid event would be where you are having your in-person event, and you're still obviously doing all of your mitigation for the event. The hybrid piece is that you are actually adding the virtual component. So when people are registering, a hybrid event is really you have a virtual and your in-person event going on at the same time. With your virtual, the key component to the virtual that we're seeing is, and that we usually tell people is that, certainly would be great if people would do it the day of the actual event, but you want to give people, we've seen anywhere from 7 to 10 days up as much as 2 weeks to actually complete the virtual event portion of it. And the important part of that then is with a hybrid thing is then you have to, it does take a little bit more work, but what we have found out, like we just did, truly Rudolph Ramble was hybrid because we had virtual components and the in-person components. But it was nice that we didn't have to really do twice the work because we can't have a normal in-person event. We can't have a mass start. We can't have 1,000 people lined up at once. We have to bring in people at different time frames. They're spread out. Cree will go over a lot of this, what that looks like. But the key thing is that, like we did with the Santa video ahead of time, that went to virtual and in-person. So we didn't have to do something separate for the in-person event versus the virtual. That was able to handle both areas. The same thing with our audio experience. The same thing with our costume contest. Our costume contests, because of the free photos and people posting their photos, we gave them a way to be able to post those so that we could do our costume contest for Rudolph Ramble. We just couldn't announce it that day. And then for our closing ceremony and our award ceremonies, we can't do them on site, but we can do those after the fact, and we do those, we put a little video together in slideshow. Now, obviously, it's a little bit hard to do awards for those that do it at their home edition or virtually, because they could be doing a downhill course or an uphill course or whatever, so it's not necessarily an even playing field. So we don't really offer awards for the virtual people, but one of the things that we did do with our Rudolph Ramble, because it's part of a series, is people really like to they get series points for being at the event and how they finish. We allowed people to still be able to earn awards towards their series. What we did is we awarded them 85% of the points that they would have gotten had they been in person. So it does a little bit of, it lessens the amount of points that they get for those that actually ran the real course, but allows them to still be part of it. And people really appreciated that. Our series registration for the entire event, comprises about 80% of all of our registrants for the entire series. And so that's been important. And then Andy, you asked a really question, why offer an in-person event at all? Why not make it only virtual? That is a really, really, really good question. And that's something you really have to decide. Part of what we have done and why someone offer in-person is because, the at-home virtual editions, everybody's been doing them. And they just like our Zoom where we get fatigued, we're getting fatigued on virtual too. And it becomes a little bit more challenging to make them creative. And we do have some really interesting technology partners and stuff that we're going to be introducing you and talking about with what Dave and Scott are doing from a pledging standpoint and fundraising standpoint, but also a good partner of mine, which is Social Distancing Sports. Kuhn is going to be presenting on Thursday, talking about some of the amazing technology that he's developed to help with these things and make the virtual more fun and more interactive. But the in-person event is something that people still really appreciate. They appreciate getting together, and they need that camaraderie. Even though they're doing it socially distanced, at Rudolph Ramble, we had somebody that was doing their very first 5K ever, and her whole family was, had run not with her, couldn't run with her because of social distancing, but was there to support her, wanted us to talk about, make a big deal of it. And then we had Eddie Lyons, who's 90 years old. This was his first event back. He's been running since his 60s, but he's 90 years old, very high risk population, obviously. This was his first event since February. But we had such a nice message afterwards about how it was nice to create that camaraderie. So for us, where we're doing events more on a community basis, and we already do have a couple of charities we're supporting with it, but it's not a full charity event. It made sense for us to do the in-person event because we need something for people to do. People want something to do, and we want to keep relevant. We want to show them they can be done safely, so that when your events come back, if they come back at a hybrid, or when they come back and hopefully fully in 2022, that people feel comfortable with it. And so Andy, I don't know if that really answered your question, but it's really a decision that you have to make whether you do one completely, why you would do a hybrid, and either go virtual or go fully in person. But we do believe that, again, the in-person can be done safely if it makes economic sense for you based on whatever your parameters are with your charity and things. And we do know that despite with our mitigation plans and the things that we've done, not every city or county is going to be easy to work with. Again, having the patience with them, but some of them are going to be so heavily restrictive that, it may diminish your event so much that it just might be better to actually go to full virtual. So there's a lot of things that come into consideration. I've gone a lot over my time, but we'll have time a little bit later today to take some more questions. And you can always reach out to us. And again, that's what HAL Sports, we're here. And any of the panelists are here to help you as you decide these things on if you can do a hybrid, why you should do why you would want to look to do a hybrid, or should you, or can you do it successfully, or do you just go for virtual? So thank you, everybody.